Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for getting and keeping people on the same page in times of crisis with Nick Anderson. Hello, Nick.
Hi, how are you?
Doing great. So nice to have you. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
So we're going to just get on started here. Oop, I think my screen stopped showing, didn't it? Can you guys still see my screen? No, you can't see my screen, can you? Let me try that again. Aha, you see it now?
I do now.
Okay, we're good then. I just want to say thank you guys for joining us, and I want to say hello and thank you to our sponsors. Our sponsors include the Whitmarsh Consulting Group. David Whitmarsh and his team of super talented folks have really pulled up all the stops to help us make the Leading in a Crisis Summit possible. They are super talented group of multi-channel marketing experts. Do reach out if you have marketing needs, especially digital needs at this time. I also want to say thank you to S.M.A.R.T.E.R, HR that makes a difference. And S.M.A.R.T.E.R really put together a pretty fantastic sponsorship for us. I reached out. I said, this is what I want to do. Would you be willing? I don't know how to, how we're going to pull all this off in just a matter of days, but what do you think? Are you game? They absolutely said, what can we do to help? And then I went back and I said, well, would you be willing to put together something free to offer our HR folks on the call? And they thought about it and they put together a free HR financial analysis report and confidential debrief. And as I inquired a little bit more about this, it's not some digital dashboard that you enter information to and it spits out a generic report. This is actually a pretty labor-intensive process. They know that this is the year of complete disruption. If you had an HR budget before, you certainly don't have the same one you did before now. Everything has shifted. And so they wanted to be of service. They know that not everyone that takes advantage of their HR financial analysis report and debrief is going to be a good fit. And they said, come on anyway. So if you think that that may support you in your goals, please don't hesitate to reach out. Our business performance advisor over there, Josh, will take great care of you. You can learn more at https://turnkeycoachingsolutions.net/HR report. One final sponsor I want to mention is our team of outplacement services specialists. They have put together a pretty phenomenal offering around outplacement, all the way from executive outplacement to frontline, with a variety of packages that could truly meet any budget and support organizations who are having this difficult task of laying off and furloughing workers. And we would be honored to have a conversation with you about that if in fact that would be supportive. A little about me. My name is Anissa Avon and I am the CEO of Turnkey Coaching and Development Solutions. Our team is we have coaches, trainers, and OD experts like Nick in every single major metropolitan area in the U.S., as well as in key hubs globally. But what I'm most proud of is when I reached out to my team and I said, everyone's in trouble. We're a small business. We're in trouble. Our friends are in trouble. We have clients in trouble. What are we going to do to serve? That's where we need to put our attention. And what came back was folks like Nick Anderson said, I have a topic I think will make a difference in people's lives and in businesses' decisions. And so within a matter of minutes, we had 40 plus speakers and counting. Our talks are going to be every Wednesday and Thursday in April and in May. And it's all about actionable business and HR strategies for navigating crisis and change, which is exactly why I'm super excited to introduce you to Nick Anderson. Nick is passionate about change. And you'll see once he begins this conversation just why he's so passionate and why he's the expert. He's a principal at the Crispian Advantage. He has 20 plus years of experience in organizational development and behavior change and project management and organizational learning. He's the co-author of Focusing Change to Win. He's led many behavioral research and sales productivity projects. He's also been a former executive in his past careers for others, as he was a VP of sales and former head of development. So in a normal basis, he does a lot of sales training and sales organizational development design. And today he's going to share a lot with us about what it's going to mean for organizations to change what they need to do to get their team aligned. So I'm going to stop sharing. Thank you, Nick, for being here. Tell us a little what I missed and what we're going to learn today.
Thank you, Anissa. Well, let's just kick off. Make sure you can see my screen.
Yes.
And we'll move to slideshow mode. Okay. So, good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining. The subject that I'm going to be talking about goes back to the 60s with originally John Machen and his work, and through from 1990 onwards, this passion of mine to see that change is actually implemented effectively has been an abiding interest of mine. And so today we're going to be covering the following. So I want to look at misalignment and how it contributes to failed change. This crisis is no different from many others that clients have been through. What happens when people are misaligned? What is our starting point and how difficult is it going to be to actually get people to say work virtually, which would be a simple example of what we're going through. Then get practical. Okay, so what is alignment? How do you get aligned, and what are the benefits to you? And so just a couple of reference points here. You're probably aware that McKinsey's been tracking failed change for some time. 60% of change failed, initiatives still fail. And in line with Machen and his earlier work and ours, this is what we find by our work. So through our surveys, 70% of leaders' expectations regarding major change are not understood by their people, particularly when downsizing.
Wow.
And that
is heartbreaking.
Unfortunately is, and the other, I'll come on to how we're dealing with that. Just to give you a sense of reality for, okay, so what does it sound like when people are not on the same page? Expecting things to be done and being disappointed. So somebody walks in the office and says, Anissa, where's the report? And Anissa says, what report? I told you. And so the conversation then obviously spirals downward. And the boss normally walks down the corridor going, she doesn't get it. And Anissa's sitting there going, you have to be a mind reader to be.
Yes.
So, you know
that conversation.
Yeah, well, if you've been in corporate life any length of time, either in Europe or in America, it's a pretty Catholic problem, as they say. and that sort of welling, particularly now, that welling anger of important decisions that fall apart, and you suddenly find out that somebody's yes is not their yes. It may be a definite maybe. And agreeing facts that people have agreed facts, but their interpretation is completely different from yours. The point is that's people not being on the same page. It's costly, it's persuasive, and it's destructive to your culture. So if you look at Project Management Institute, because they claim that they are the premier organization for successful change, they track these things. 100 million is being wasted out of every billion invested. The interesting thing is the higher performers really understand how to do it and the low performers don't. So there's hope for us in terms of that. And certainly they track these things about change. And, you won't be surprised. The old adage is, give me a B implementation over an A strategy any day. It's the old adage of implementation, and execution is crucial. We all have aspirations for our organizations and set goals, but how do we get people on side? And certainly from the point of view of considering managing change in a culture, is this what your change culture looks like?
Oh, yes, I think
And so
that's pretty bad.
so what we're looking at is expectation gaps. You know, the report example, where's the report? What report is an expectations gap,
Yeah.
right? And if you live in the Midwest, you'll be familiar with pothole season, you know? And there's a lot of companies that make a lot of money repairing your suspension, tires, and whatever, but essentially they don't get any better, they get worse. So what do we do about that? Well, the thing about it, just let's pause for a minute and think about what these gaps do. And this is Lencioni's five factors that you probably recognize, but it's a good vehicle to sort of start conjuring up what it is that the first thing is, if I don't know what you expect of me, am I going to trust you? Am I going to trust the situation? If I'm unsure of that, then the fear of conflict is I don't want to start disagreeing with you when I'm not sure of what you expect of me. And therefore, when people like leaders look to commitment from people, they'll find it being absent. And of course, nobody wants to commit to something they don't fully understand or feel in agreement to. And so you have inattention to results. There's a spiral happening there within this whole area of misaligned expectations. So what's not being talked about? You know, what's the 800-pound gorilla in the room, right? And how many of these are due to people not being on the same page? So I'm not putting forward a panacea for all organizational ills, obviously, but there's an important component for successful change that we have to ask ourselves, is this being addressed?
Well, and I'm sure you're going to get to this in a minute, but on that last one, can you go back to that last slide real quick?
Sure, yeah.
What's not being talked about, and I suspect you're going to get to this, even when leaders and their direct reports and HR are actively talking about it, there's something missed in the communication that closes that gap. So I'm hoping you're going to share with us some tools around, we can talk about it, but how do we get that alignment?
Everyone can talk about it. The biggest problem with leadership,
right?
Leadership's in a time of crisis, leaders go into a virtual conference room, not literally a physical one, and they say, what are we going to do? And they come out with a plan, and then for the last 5 minutes of a 3-hour meeting, they go, how are we going to communicate it?
So fair.
And this is we might have the right strategy, but if we don't think about the implementation, we're not going anywhere.
Well said.
And certainly from the research that we did with the book, Focusing Change to Win, was 1,000 managers thereabouts, 80 countries, 25 industry sectors. We polled them about various things, and we said, what about resistance to change? The thing to look down that list is they've got a ring of familiarity. When change is coming, how many of your people that are fearful of their loss of status, or more importantly, job security? They feel unprepared to work virtually. They're comfortable with the current state. The biggest bugaboo in terms of successful change will be if you don't make it clear the status quo will rule all the time, and people aren't seeing the benefits for change. And of course, there's insufficient communication and the fear of the unknown. I mean, if you look, they're all high percentages, and they're not surprising. But when we start thinking about the people that we're trying to bring along with us, the old FUD thing is there: fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And certainly, as we go into planning this change, we have a familiar problem which we have to think about. And I'll give you a simple example of it. The biggest problem we have in expectations and bringing about change is when effort is larger than reward. Yeah. And in all implementations, people have to put in a lot of effort before they get reward.
Yes.
And so the what and the why starts diverging, and we get to what I wish I'd come up with this, the curves of Christophanies. This is Mr. Neil Rackham, who I work for. And it superbly describes this point, which we all know exists and we've all had experience of it. But, you know, the worst thing that can happen is the steam starts coming out of our ears, right?
Yes.
And
how'd you get that picture of me? Just kidding.
Particularly trying to transition to virtual, right?
Right.
The point about it, of course, in implementation, this is just one divergence. In a big implementation of an ERP project, for example, you'll have several of these over the life of implementation. And how do you manage that? How do you set expectations that that's what we're going to go through? How do we persist when something is not happening as fast as we want it to? And if we don't pay attention to this, then we will suddenly find poor implementation and so on. But,
so
you know,
point
most
of clarification on that. The curve is saying that when we're first starting out, there's a point at which we have a why, we get the why, we know why we're doing it, and we're going to start the activity of what we're doing. And at the beginning, we can be fired up because we get our why. But the more
Correct.
we're in the tasks of doing and what, the bigger gap is to why we started this in the first place. And that's where the frustration is. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's correct. And it's particularly working virtually and on your own, you're doing a lot of things. And over a period of time, you lose sight of the why because you're not seeing the reward.
Yeah.
You know, why am I having to transition from HubSpot to Salesforce, for crying out loud, in the middle of a crisis? Which would be a recent example that I've experienced. But certainly people are looking at change and they go, whatever you do, don't open your mouth, you know, because this is just going to mean more. And everyone's going, yeah, here we go again. You know, I'm going to be asked to work harder, longer, and probably have my pay cut in the process, given that we're in a crisis. Well, to be reassured a minute, these are the sorts of organizations that have come across problems over a period of time. The thing that I want you to note is we've got people from banking, telecommunications, local government, community colleges, and so on. This is not you can't say in a particular sector this occurs. It occurs across the board, and certainly it emulates what Machin found in his early work pre-1980. So that ain't new. Our ability to actually do something about it has not really improved, given that we've used 360 surveys and these sorts of things. We've used RACI analysis, responsibilities, accountabilities, consulting and information, and it still doesn't cut it. And I could talk more about that. But if we're looking at an organization and thinking about, well, where are we in terms of where's the misalignment, you'll be familiar with the process of how change happens. The first thing is, you know, what's the problem? How is it a problem? And what are the consequences? So does everyone get that? You know, because if they don't, the change pivot will not operate. And we won't get people receptive to working on why solve it, how to solve it, and what will be solved. Now, if you've been from the neuro-linguistic tradition or in terms of influence and persuasion, you'll recognize that this is a process of disturbing to enable. And it's a rubric, it's a fractal of organizational life. If we don't get it right, we don't have the commitment, we don't have the trust. So here's an example of what does that mean in terms of a typical structure. So here you see the leaders have gone through the whole process. They've wrapped the wet towel around their head, and they've thought, right, we've got a plan, we know how to solve it, know how we're going to, and they've got way past everyone else. The manager's in the middle going, what's the, and everyone else is sitting around going, what problem?
I want to give you a quick example of just that and how critical it is to have this dialogue. We were working with a manufacturing organization, and we helped them rank, according to their team, their top 27 challenges, right? And only the operational leader selected revenue, right, as the top challenge. So when he got the paperwork and his entire other 11-member executive team, none of them of which thought that they had a revenue problem, it allowed them, they'd been working together years, it allowed them to stop in their tracks and say, wait, what? How can you guys not see that this is a problem? And from there, they were able to get why he thought it was a problem and why they didn't. And all of a sudden, everything changed for them.
Yeah.
But you can't really change something if you don't have a diagnosis for where the gap is, which is what you're sharing.
Yeah, and the engagement that's needed to get everyone on the same page raises the whole thing about communication, but more importantly, what we're communicating about.
Excellent.
Certainly, in leaders, the problem comes to people are unclear what they should be stop doing, start doing, and continue doing, a familiar format, right? But unstated, misunderstood expectations just increase stress and change resistance. The biggest problem will be the status quo. If I'm unclear, I'll go and do what I've always done, what I've been rewarded for. And of course, we're now in a completely different, it's the buggy whip and the buggy whip manufacturer and the car manufacturer. We still want to make buggy whips, and Henry Ford's churning out Model Ts like at a rate of knots, right?
Yes.
So let's have a look at some practicality then about how you go about this. This is the rubric. This is the essential element of expectation alignment. You'll notice in the yellow sector what my expectations of you and what you think I expect of you. Is there a match? And similarly, am I taking the time to find out what your expectations of me are, and do they match with what I think you expect of me? Just to put some practicality to it, here's two senior executives on a $680 million construction project. Tom is the leader. So Cliff pretty much understands what Tom expects, 13 to 12, right? Tom didn't have a clue, nor did he have other members of his leadership team. Cliff had 22 expectations of him, and Tom only thought there were 4. And as you'll see later on, I'll describe in more detail that this was a big problem. But that's the sort of tracking that you want to be looking at. Now, so the rubric, if you take nothing away and just having a more structured conversation with people, you can go all the way through to some pretty chunky analysis. But essentially, have we got this board understood by people, and have we got people talking about what I expect you to stop, start, and keep doing, and what I think you expect of me to stop, start doing. And the important thing is the sequence: stop and start and keep, and I'll come on to that in a minute. Certainly, the other thing is, what are we trying to align? We're not trying to align everything. If we had 20 people in a team, we've got 380 lines of communication. It gets chunky pretty quickly. So from this construction project, you'll see they isolated those 5 areas that they determined were components. They said, these are the areas where we are misaligned or we're seeing this problem and we've got to get back on track. None surprisingly, the first one, right? Project leadership. You'll notice as you read down this list, respectful communication. These are in the vernacular, some pretty hardened construction people. The design engineers, contractors, subcontractors, these sorts of people. And one of the things, it took 3 days to get these, by the way, was to take into consideration the contribution of others. Team integration, welcome the talents and contribution of all members. Value innovation, articulate the value of individual contributions. This is really the blend of very practical people recognizing the need for what Goldman would call emotional intelligence. Yeah. So the alignment components are really important that the leadership team articulate them. And so we start thinking about what are those components about and what are we trying to align? Clearly, we're not just focusing on tasks and actions. Can we get to shared values and beliefs to be aligned? Because if we do that, the deeper the alignment, the simpler it gets. So if we really understand fundamentally as an organization what we mean by meeting customer expectations, for example, it's based on a value system of, then we don't have to align people on specific tasks and actions. We can say, Anissa gets it, I trust her judgment, and Anissa goes and does it. And so from that point of view, okay, so I'm in a crisis. Let's, physician, heal thyself, right? So what expectations do I have of myself in this crisis? And bearing in mind 70% of leaders' expectations are not understood or known, one thing I find is the other corollary is the leaders can't articulate their expectations. So it's important to start with yourself. Why should I? What's in it for me? Clearly has to be an important part of defining and believing in your expectations. The other thing is, what are they? Are they realistic? Also, whose help do I need? This is a team game. And so what's my collaborative element to do that? And certainly, how do I measure the success? What evidence do I need of that? And this is a thing that you can do after this presentation. If you think about this, you'll be further along than a lot of people in this crisis of being able to lead because you offer clarity. Not being right or wrong, but you're being clear, and therefore you can engage people and find out where they're aligned. So
and engaging in that, you're saying, is it can be as simple as answering those questions on a piece of paper.
Yeah, it can be done on flip charts in a room. I've run alignment sessions in 2 hours where leadership teams realize they fundamentally don't know what they actually expect of people. Mm-hmm. And so from that point of view, once I have my expectations, it's a bit like being presented with a huge buffet, and I want a salad, right? So the first thing, as somebody who's troubled by weight, the first thing is, what do we expect people to stop doing? This is a changed environment. They believe they have a full plate, and we want to take things off, so we help them consider what to start. If we just pile on, like the bird example, whatever you do, don't open your mouth, right?
Yeah.
So we've got to, what do we take off the table? And then we can start saying, what do you expect people to start doing, and what do they want you to start doing? So you notice there's a yin and a yang to this in terms of two-way communication. And then what do you want people to keep doing? There's an organization, there's a shared values, and as you saw from the clients, there's some educational, institutional, and organizational norms and values, and you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. So this is a simple sequence of having a structured discussion, and I would strongly recommend you keep these 3 phases separate to do that.
And are you suggesting just in that order, the stop, start, continue? And is this is a two-way dialogue? So you get into the flow of having this two-way, is that correct?
Yes, it is. And it's very important that you do that. The other thing is, what is an expectation? Most people confuse goals, objectives, missions, and all the other things that we talk about. And what a fuzzy area that is. Mm-hmm. So Henry Evans came up with the idea of S.M.A.R.T.E.R in the context of setting objectives. And I just tweaked that a little bit, what we're all familiar with. Specific and measurable, that, okay, makes sense. The A is not achievable, it's agreed. Because you need to agree an expectation, and then you can go into realistic and timed, time-bound, and ethical relates to your values of how you treat people and customers, your values as an organization, and then you record them. And you record them for a number of reasons, not least of which is replicable. You want these things to be replicable and for people to understand them, and for you to be consistent. And there are other elements of why it's valuable to record that will inform performance development, recruiting, and everything else, but we can't go into that for the minute. So in terms of how we do it, the expectations originator starts. You go, duh. No, not duh. 70% of leaders' expectations are neither not known or understood. So the first thing is, if you have an expectation of somebody, you remember the comment about you have to be a mind reader to work around here, right? You have to start the conversation with one other person or a group. I don't recommend large groups because that starts muddying it, but you might have a team of 3 or 4 or 5 leaders. Then you discuss whether this the person that you expect something, them to do something different, you say, do we agree, discard, or disagree? Now, assuming the expectations agreed, then here's what a crisis will do. The leader will say, okay, Anissa agreed to produce the report for Monday. And then Anissa produces a report and say, no, that's not what I wanted. And then there's another conversation that will rapidly take a negative turn. So the important thing is to ask, okay, you've agreed to do that. Tell me what you will deliver and what you won't deliver. What's your idea of that deliverable? And some of these might be continuous and some of them might be timed. So treating people with respect, as you saw in another example, is obviously a continuous expectation, whereas actually reconfiguring or rescheduling or whatever, it often has needs a timed element to it. The other thing is, you as the originator can't get out of jail just by doing this. And it's the why have a dog and bark yourself problem. If you want this to be resolved and you don't want to suddenly find yourself having 150 emails a day, as one of my clients had, because they didn't understand how to support the people in the first place. Support can come in terms of budgetary, political, coaching, whatever, but you have to recognize the reality of doing that, and you have to provide it. If you drop the ball at any one of these stages, you'll make your culture even more difficult to change, because people will say, here we go again, do as I say, not do as I do, and all that sort of stuff that we're familiar with comes into it.
On the one right there, you said the originator provides agreed help and support, and the one above it, originator assesses receivers. In assesses, that's also a two-way dialogue. What can I do to support you? What do you need? Okay.
There will be two elements. One is if you know the individual well, you need to step back and say, what do I know about Bill's ability? And don't give it, this is the realistic thing. Don't give something like Bill's an engineer and I expect him to do a presentation to the board of a major client. That ain't gonna go well.
Right.
And from that point of view. So we've reached a point of saying, okay, there is a process, it's defined, it's well established. So what, and I've chosen 3 case studies. The steel fabricator, small family business, at the time employed about 60 odd people, a national telecom sales force, and a large construction project. Just to demonstrate, there's different applications, but the same things apply. Here's Ken Gensink of Gensink Steel, kindly provides us with the case study. And you'll notice here that Ken tried 5 years to get out of running the company, Ginseng Steel, so he could focus on the other 2 companies. And twice he had to come in and save the business. So he said, I realized more than ever, many decisions and observations of mine were assumptions. Well, this is a hard-bitten steel fabricator coming to that. And so what we did was, we developed a vision for change to reduce the dependency of the owner's day-to-day management. He didn't have that, so we helped him. And then we said, what are the components? What are the key elements that we need to see to achieving greater market responsibility and enable him to divide time to other businesses? We did this in a period of 14 weeks, and we have a system called Alex Automatic Accountability Tracking, which I'm not going to go into today, but suffice it to say, we had 14 alignment components across 9 people. And it took us 14 weeks to do it. And Ken is still not running this business. He owns it, but as you'll see from the website, it's gone on to from strength to strength. So he said, well, it gains insights about new people. Many decisions and observations of mine were assumptions. And it helped people verify and test each other's assumptions. So it's basically getting to a point of standing back, to store issues and revisit them in a systematic way. This project actually lasted 14 weeks, and at the end we had 30 items of disagreement. Wow. And so we put the leadership team in a room for a day and resolved all of them.
Wow.
And then we can measure progress. So here's just so that's a steel fabricator, owns his own business, hard nosed. It's a pretty tough life being a steel fabricator. Here's Sharon Seavey, again with permission. She tried to get her sales force to realize selling product wasn't going to make it. At the time, the telecoms industry, what they were selling, the hardware, the margins were going down, and they needed to sell people and services more than product. And she'd been banging on about it for some time. And she said, they don't get it. I've tried, you know, an away day with my 9 sales directors, each of which had a sales force in the country. You'll notice the first element, her expectations of her sales directors far exceeded the direct report's assumptions.
And this is their data that you're using here. So her sales team, or her direct reports and her, and how mismatched they were around their expectations.
Yeah. Yeah. One of her good friends, who was a sales director, who lived down the corridor in Denver, there was an 84-4 misalignment. She had 84 expectations, which were the same for everybody, but in this case, it was just, they'd gone on like a house on fire. But she was so frustrated. You can see the other bars that are showing some pretty significant issues of coaching, planning, collaborating, communicating. Recognition was okay, competition okay, you know, but essentially, and these components, by the way, were developed with Sharon prior to doing the exercise. Really
hard to lead a team to drive results, and especially at a time like this, when there's that much misalignment, no matter how desperately you want there to be alignment, when there's not, that it's really hard to create change.
The bottom line of that was, in a 90-day period, we actually put on a significant amount of revenue after this alignment exercise had been done. So obviously we fed it back to people, talked about it, and we resolved it. On the last example, we've got a construction project. $680 million, pretty chunky, right, for a construction project. Renovate an old hospital, build a medical foundation building, and a women and children's hospital. And you had escalating change orders and RFIs. What does that mean? Well, at this point, when we were brought in, they had burnt, and I use the term deliberately, they burnt 22 million of their 30 million contingency, and they had not started building the women and children's hospital. And as the figurative expression that one wag said, yeah, and everyone's opening the file drawer and looking at the contracts. So you've got architects, design engineers, contractors, subcontractors. And the reasons for it, I'll summarize a few of them, was just how things were being, the change process of the specifications and type of project was really a problem. The consequences, as I've stated, to say there were strained relationships, it took us 3 days to get out the alignment components that you saw earlier. In other words, every one of the parties had to agree and sign off that these were the areas for alignment. And professional and consulting fees were just out of the window. So we got 6 alignment components across 7 groups. We coached key players to generate expectations for each component and provide an analysis and feedback. And so the Tom Cliff example you saw earlier, where Cliff had 22 expectations and Tom only thought there were 4, that was mirrored across the leadership team. And over a period of time, we just kept chipping away at getting better and better alignment. And so this is where we started the project. You'll notice the 6 components are on the horizontal axis, and the red section is the alignment indices. In other words, there's an expectation and aligning with what people think is expected. That's an aligned expectation. And the purple section is where an expectation is floating out there and nobody's aware of it. or the people that is being pointed at. So we have what we call a distraction indices, and in 3 months, that's what happened. You'll notice project quality was markedly up. Respectful communication, we are dealing with the construction industry, right? So there's only, our expectations were not that high, but we certainly achieved quite a bit of change. The biggest thing for me was the value innovation at the end, where we got considerably better at shared expectations about what it meant to deliver a quality product. And the outcomes were these. So that's the
go back to those outcomes. Tell us a little bit, if you've got time, about how you achieve those, right? Like, part of what you're sharing is the process for stop, start, continue.
Yeah.
But dig in just a little bit about how that produces alignment that allows a team to drive for results while aligned.
I'll give you an example. Somebody's I actually was observer on many of these project meetings, and there's about 20 people on a conference call, and somebody said, well, why don't we move the stereotaxis lab from floor 2 to floor 7? So the whole conversation then started revolving around the implications of that change: stress loading, moving IT cabinets, air conditioning, blah, blah, blah. And somebody, Steve Riccobona, the project manager for that piece, said at one point, has anyone got any money? Because what they talked about was a $2.1 million change, and nobody had got clearance for it. So the expectation was, in terms of when you propose a change, the first thing you do is check to see if there's any money. I'm summarizing to make the point. The other thing was, on these conference calls, as you probably know, professionals are sitting on a call. A design engineer, what would you think a design engineer charges per hour? I'm sorry. So let's say $200 for the sake of argument. It's probably a lot more now. You have 15 or so of these people who didn't say anything during the whole conference call, and they were charging you $200 an hour. And the fact is, the meetings were so ineffective that they had a meeting to decide what was decided at the last meeting. I'm summarizing a lot to make the point. So the expectations are, when you're attending a meeting, you have to have a good reason to do it, and stop wasting time. The other thing was, the NES construction project is based on OAC, owner, architect, contractor meetings. They're very familiar ways of reviewing project progress, and limiting who was on that call and how many times that happened started to get focused on in terms of reducing costs.
Openness and trust helped eliminate profit erosion. So from the work that you've done, simple alignment has bottom line results. One of the things that you had shared with me previously was that you've spent a lot of your career quantifying these soft skill activities into quantifiable measurements. Can you speak a little bit about how an organization might do some of that?
The first area would be a leadership team, and would say, this is a crisis, yes. What are the areas where we think we as a team and our people are misaligned? What changes are we expecting in people's behavior? And the first thing is, the leadership team defines those components, both by the title of the component, a short definition and a long definition. Why would you bother doing that? Well, it's the language of the leaders. So the first impact you have is, these are the areas to focus on. This is how you talk about them. And that immediately starts giving clarity to people, the people who are expected to implement. The next thing is to say, okay, now what are your expectations of, and this could be a person or people, depending on the exercise. And the extent to which you do this can be either on flip charts in a room, or you can go to the formality of having a Excel spreadsheet, which would be the next level of sophistication. Say, Anissa, we've agreed these 6 areas, right? Now, what do you expect of me, and what do you think I expect of you? And that analysis is then brought back to the team and saying, okay, Anissa, I didn't realize you had 16 expectations of me. And so we start setting up two-way conversations. Now, sometimes leaders need to talk to a team, and to be consistent, we need to align expectations from the leader for the team, consistency and everything else being what it is. In other projects, then it goes down to another level where the leaders taking the expectations that have been agreed in their team, they then move into their direct reports and repeat the exercise.
Okay.
And then, of course, as expectations are agreed, performance standards are agreed, and how that is tracked over time. And that's basically what we found when Machin, who I spoke to before he died, he had some software that would actually do this. They lost the software and they lost the code. And so with advances in computer technology, we're now able to track as many people as you like. So if you have 1,000 people, 1,000 times 1,000 minus 1,000, 900,000 lines of communication, we can actually do that. But I'm not, obviously, I mean, I'm just saying we can scale.
Yes.
But the first thing is, how do you run an alignment exercise for 2 hours? And my very good friend, who's president of Seward County Community College, President Trasker, Ken Trasker, we ran a session for 198 people in an afternoon. And
that's a lot of people to run an alignment session.
Well, it was all the staff of the college, and it was about aligning expectations on 5 values, and which is still in use today. And we did it 3-4 years ago.
So I'm assuming you broke them into groups so that they could align with peers through activities.
Yeah, we did a couple of things. One is we got groups of, for example, faculty members. We put different faculty members together, and then maintenance people and all the administration and all those sorts of things. And we had them in those groups, and we got them to produce expectations on flip charts and feed it back to us. And that led to a whole series of actions to indicate where there were misalignments and where further conversation needed to be had. And obviously, we were kicking off a process by doing that.
Very good. Very good. Well, I know that you have, I want to make sure people know how to get a hold of you. So your contact details there, if you show those. And then you've also put together a couple of special packages, including a few. Would you share that with us?
Certainly, yeah. One of the things I'm passionate about is helping people start understanding the level of how to align in small organizations as well as large ones. Most of the audience will be in small organizations, and that's fair enough. The principles still apply, but how do I apply it to, in one case, I did it with 4 people making a change. And so what I would like to do is help a team like that to run an alignment exercise with them. Up to 2 hours, I'm prepared to devote my time for free to do that, because it's such an important subject. And at times when money is very, very tight, I really want to help people understand how to align and how to keep people aligned, because it is a process that continues if it's going to be successful.
Excellent. And then I also know that you're offering 10% off of your consulting services. So thank you for that. And then I think you had one other freebie.
Copies of my book, Focusing Change to Win.
Wow. Fantastic. Thank you. And so folks can just contact you at that email in order to take advantage of that? Okay. Yeah. Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you, Nick. I appreciate you and what you've brought forth today. So I think
You're
that it's
welcome.
very timely.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you. And thank you everyone for being here. All right. Stay safe and healthy.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.